Hello everybody, welcome to PASS Community News, and we're having a webinar today on unlocking data insights with Dandy Veen from Microsoft. We're delighted to have Dandy here today. A few things about PASS. We are a global organisation. We support learning on the Microsoft data platform globally. So you will see we have events all over the world, from the UK right across to the US and even down to Portugal. So hopefully we'll see you at an event. We have a number of virtual chapter meetings. This is one of them, and thank you for joining us today. We even have virtual chapter meetings in Russian and Spanish, as well as in business intelligence, business analytics, and lots of database administration topics. They're also downloadable, so if you miss each event, you can always go and get them from the website, including this webinar, which we will also be recording. So today's session is Unlocking Data Insights, and I'm personally delighted to have Dandy along with us today. Dandy's a very well-known presenter. I've had the pleasure of listening to Dandy's sessions at places like TechEd and also in events in and around Europe and UK. So I'm really excited to have Dandy with us today. So thank you, Dandy, for joining us. So here's a list of our virtual chapters in case any of these other topics interest you. And obviously this is part of the Business Intelligence virtual chapter. Now if you're interested in volunteering with PASS at all, we do offer a range of opportunities if you'd like to get involved in the community. I would say that my life has really changed since volunteering, and it's been fantastic to meet all of the SQL family, as we say, throughout the world. One last thing, we have the Business Analytics Conference, May the 7th to the 9th in San Jose. And it's basically for people who love business intelligence, business analytics, and have an interest in topics like data science. I went last year and I really felt at home. So I hope to see you there. And if you're interested in learning more about SQL Server and business intelligence, why don't you join us? It's free and we disseminate lots of information in lots of different languages. And we look forward to seeing you. So what I'm going to do now is hand you over to Dandy. Now Dandy works for Microsoft and he's going to have a really interesting session for us today on business intelligence. So what I'm going to do is hand over to Dandy, and we will take questions and we will answer those at the end. So I will make sure that Dandy's not muted. There you are.
Okay, so thanks for joining everyone, and thank you, Jen, for the introduction and the level setting you did there. It's always nice to hear from another fellow presenter on how your presentations are and get some feedback on that. So really appreciate the kudos there. So for the folks on the meeting today that don't know who I am, let's go for a little introduction. My name is Dandy Veen. I've been working at Microsoft for about 5 years now, but I've been a long time PASS Summit presenter when I started with databases when I was about 16. From a contact information perspective, you have my Twitter information right there, so feel free to join and follow me on Twitter. At times I have some interesting things to tweet. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to look on how we provide faster data insights, which is actually part of a series of webinars that we're working on together with PASS towards the SQL Server 2014 launch. And so looking at the background that I have for databases, what we're slightly going to touch on is what are the capabilities that you need to think about in SQL Server 2014 that are coming up that will really allow you and enhance the capabilities you have with business intelligence, and then of course, why are we doing this? Why are we going certain directions, or enable you to get to some of those features? So as we look at this, we'll actually see that there's an interesting transition and interesting trends. From a data perspective, we'll see that there's a huge data explosion going on. There's the companies and customers that I talk to, they actually want to not only do more with their data, but they also want to find out more about what customers say about their products, about their capabilities, about their tools, and so on. And so we see a huge expansion in terms of data growth. And if you look on the data types that are supported by that, there's about 85% coming from new data types that are being used, and interesting to find out. Now, even though I work for Microsoft, I know very well, and I'm very well aware of some things that are going on in the industry, and that's the single truth of data does not always necessarily sit into a data warehouse. So, and with that mindset, we're actually taking an approach that allows self-service BI users to bring that data closer together, and being able to leverage things such as connected devices, which, I mean, even if I guess you look around you, I'm pretty sure that on the desk you have in front of you right now, you probably have a cell phone, which is a connected device. You might have a tablet, and you're probably also having a desktop or whatever device you're using to monitor this. So thinking about that, there's a lot of connectivity within devices. So look at that on the evolution from a BI perspective. We'll see there's the traditional corporate BI that is managed by IT Pro, and the IT infrastructure has actually been relatively busy keeping up with the growing demand from BI and the growing demand of users that want to get access to BI tools. Using things like SQL Server reporting services, for example, we see a huge uptake into the need and the desire to have reporting with additional visualization and capabilities, but we've also seen a huge uptake in terms of self-service BI users that want to go ahead and discover that data by themselves. So typically in a corporate BI environment is you look at existing data that come from line of business applications, that come from existing data marts, so that come from a series of files, and you traditionally would want to bring that in to using an ETL process, which is going to look into loading data, enabling data quality on that by, for example, using SQL Server data quality services, and then populate the traditional analysis services cube or populate the data warehouse to then provision and build a certain level of reporting on top of that, which could be dashboarding and scorecarding that you surface through portals like SharePoint or using Performance Point, for example, and then bring that over to the end user. Now, where we see a significant growth, and if you think about that, I mean, I guess everyone on this call is using Excel. Excel for any kind of BI or corporate BI solution or any type of line of business applications. If there's one capability that each of those share in common, it's the capability to export to Excel. Now, put that in the mindset is people are used to using Excel. They know how to create pivot tables or might just be able to easily pull together and create a specific graph and use that. Or they might be using specialized tools that have a capability to link to an Excel spreadsheet or even to export to Excel for further analysis. And so to that perspective, we see that there's a rapid breakdown in terms of the barriers of control when it comes to self-service BI. So what we're doing is we want to make sure we bring that into a IT governance environment where IT actually can have control, providing access to data sets that the user might get access to, and then being able to surface that, balance that with the necessary agility in order to let that self-service BI explore those data sets. If you look on the players in the corporate BI, there's the traditionals, Oracle, IBM, SAP, Microsoft. On the self-service BI, you see a lot of startups that are actually building dedicated BI solutions out there. If we were to combine this, Microsoft actually has a very, very unique position when it comes to business intelligence. And so we have the entire platform that supports our corporate BI story. And so in SQL Server 2014, we're actually making enhancements in terms of data warehousing to be able to surface reporting and query responding much faster by a capability that we actually introduced in SQL Server 2012, which is called column store indexing. And so in SQL Server 2014, we're actually going further and beyond that by enhancing column store indexing to a pure columnar store. So from a performance perspective, not only are we taking advantage of the great levels of compression and the in-memory engine that we introduced with tablet model and the in-memory model that we have sitting within Power Pivot, but we're actually also bringing that into in-memory capabilities directly within a SQL Server engine from an OLTP perspective, which is what we codenamed Hackathon, and you're going to have some more detailed sessions on that later. But we're using literally that same engine in the self-service BI component within Excel, being able to leverage Power Pivot. Now, if you want to bring data to a huge amount of users, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can say, I'm going to have people work disconnected with workbooks and so on, or I can go for a cloud-based solution that allows me to combine the best of both worlds. One of the customers I was talking to a while ago was like, oh, their first take was like, I don't see any use case where we can actually use the cloud. And I go, well, how do you deploy, let's say, Office to Office 365, so that includes Excel 2013. How do you deploy that to your users? And the typical environment that they have is a user environment where majority of the users are disconnected, never get to a corporate office whatsoever. So we looked at them and says like, well, if you think about it, the best way to deploy Office for you guys is Office 365. And the best way to collaborate and share is by actually using some of the capabilities that you already have. They were already using Exchange Online, they were already using SharePoint Online. And so what we did is we actually surfaced and focused around that in terms of innovative capabilities that we're bringing within the product. You see that from an innovation perspective within the database engine, we actually did a lot of things, not only on the database engine, but also in terms of operational reporting, and then more specifically, bringing in data mining capabilities into SQL Server 2008, data modeling capabilities directly within Excel, and self-service BI components by introducing the Power Pivot model in Excel, and then the capability to generate a Power View report directly with Excel is actually part of those capabilities in order to surface. So if we look at it from a scale and management perspective, we want to be able to provide a solid corporate BI solution for IT professionals, but also provide a self-service BI solution not only for business analysts, but also for end users that we can empower with a familiarity of using Excel to that perspective. And then, of course, if you think about advanced analytics, predictive analytics, there's data mining capabilities that we're going to talk about briefly in this presentation, but we're not going to drill down into that because that's going to be probably subject for one of the next chapters that we bring in. So I talked about the corporate BI perspective, which is a traditional dashboarding, reporting, analysis, master data management, and things like data quality, which surprisingly I see a lot of database vendors not even have a good quality data quality services perspective. And really, if you want to do business intelligence or business analytics right, it's all about making sure you have good quality data and you can integrate that data in many ways. We also believe that you want to be able to surface that data between on-premises data sources that sit within the traditional SQL Server databases, Oracle, whatever you're using, and then being able to extend that with cloud opportunities. And what I mean by that is you want to be able to bring that closer to the user and let the user use that from any kind of device that the user would like to use. Which means we want to be able to bring BI to the masses by surfacing that onto tablet devices and basically bring that a capability that we can do that on any kind of browser. If we look at it from a corporate perspective, one of the largest analysis services cubes that we have in place is Yahoo, which basically has a 24 terabyte analysis services cube. If we now focus on the self-service BI capabilities, there's been significant investments that we're bringing into the self-service BI space that take advantage of this new SQL Server 2014 capabilities. And from an insight perspective, it's our goal and scope to bring data insights to a billion of Office users that are currently already using Excel. And now we want to enrich them and deliver them capabilities that will allow them to discover, analyze, and visualize data from the familiarity of Excel. And then, of course, bring that into a sharing, collaboration perspective, allowing the users to consume that on any kind of device, on any kind of mobile device, yet providing every capability in terms of scale, manageability, and identify things as trusted data sources and bring those in as trusted data sources. So what we've actually done there is we went into preview, I think about 8 months ago, where we introduced a tool that was called Data Explorer and Preview, and we evolved that to Power Query. Power Query, I'm going to demo that short in short minutes here. What we'll see with Power Query there is that I actually can do data discovery and combine and merge data sources from a couple of data sets. And one of the things I'm going to show you in terms of capabilities, an online search capability in which we are very unique in terms of capabilities. So let's have a look at that, how we're going to bring that in, and then how we're going to do analysis based on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Excel and show you capabilities that we have in Power Query. Okay. So as I said during the intro, is we have quite some capabilities to connect to a variety of data sources and really think about the opportunity that we have here as a BI consumer or as a corporation in terms of connecting to any kind of data source. So, of course, you have the traditional databases you could connect to. You can go to SQL Server, Microsoft Access, Oracle, DB2, MySQL, PostgreSQL, Sybase, Teradata, you name it, and you have that capability. In meeting with a customer a while ago, the question was like, well, how do I connect to SQL Server Parallel Data Warehouse? That actually is directly available using a from SQL Server database connection, and then just specify actually the IP address and port number of the server you want to connect to. One of the other options I have here is I can actually go to from other sources and connect to a series of other sources that I can easily access and consume. And just think about that as an organization and what the capabilities are. As an organization of selling products, I want to know what people say and feel about my products. So why would I not be able to look at my operational sales data and be able to combine that with, for example, data that comes from Facebook? So what I can do there is I can actually say like, hey, I want to go from Facebook, specify a connection on what I'm looking at, and I can say like, hey, I want to find out data that comes from my Facebook feed. I'm not really sure if it's a smart move for me to pull in data that comes from my own Facebook page, but what I get here is I'm actually using the Facebook Graph API, and I can see each of the columns that I'm pulling in, and I can decide what I want to do with that. I can say, hey, there's a couple of columns here that might be useful to me, or columns that I don't want to use. But if you look at it from a transformation perspective, what I can say is I can select these messages here. I can say what the description is. I can also say that I do want to have the created time, and actually then find out what it's a link, the status whatsoever, or what the story is to that. Now, I'm in this case only selecting the columns that I would like to keep. So what I can do now is I can actually say I want to remove. I can say I want to keep the existing range, or what I can say is I can say remove the other columns. So these are the columns I'm keeping: the messages, the created time, and the story. Now, looking at that created time, you see that the data type that I get there might not be the data type that I would like to have. So what I can easily do there is I can make a transformation and say I want to transform this to a date time. Oops, sorry. I want to change this to a date, which should have worked. Sorry about that. I took the wrong column, I believe. But I can easily go back here and look at the actual steps. So let's see if we can change that to a date time. There we go. So I'm now converting that to a date time. What I'm showing you on the right-hand side here is actually the ability to go back to each of the steps. And what's behind Power Query is actually an entire modeling language that actually allows me to look on what I'm actually doing within my code. And I have the ability actually to write custom code around this, go through the steps, and then define what I want to do. So looking at this, I can see my story here. It looks like I have a very boring Facebook because the majority of the things I say is happy birthday. I'm put that on people's timelines. If I now want to import this and use this, I can just hit apply and close. And there's a couple of load options that I have. So I can load directly to the Excel worksheet, which is giving me the limitations that I do have within Excel. Or what I can do is I can load that to the Power Pivot data model, really give me the capability to take advantage of that Power Pivot engine, have a great level of data compression, and pull in millions and millions of records. I'm going to show that on how we actually did that by using another capability, which could be a publicly accessible data set. So for now, we're going to discard this one and look at some of the options that we have. So what I can do is I can say I can go from the source and retrieve data from its data site. But what I think one of the great capabilities and great powers of Power Query is a capability to do an online search. I have data that I pulled in from my operational relational databases. What I want to do now is I want to enrich them. I'm selling products into a specific area, but I want to see what my customer impact is. So what I can do is I can look for things online by just typing online search. I can do things like, hey, I want to look for world population by country and actually perform a search on that. And I can see a list of countries. Now, if you look on the logos that you, icon that you see here, this is the actually listing the Wikipedia icon. And so what we did is Microsoft actually did build what we call a public data catalog that is indexing each of the Wikipedia pages. Can you imagine if you had to do this yourself and go to Wikipedia, copy, paste, put that into your own database on how much work you would actually have to do to maintain that, keep that up to date? Using that online search capability, you don't have to, because what we're actually getting there is the metadata. So that means that if something changes on the underlying data set, I can actually get that underlying data set and pull that up in a query. Now, this is Power Query without using a capability that we have here, which is called, let me just move this, which is called performing a corporate-based search. So what I can do is the following. I can go to Power Query and I can sign in I'm going to use my credentials here. Okay, so now I signed into my organization, and what I can do now is I can perform an online search and look for data sets that have been either published by myself or data sets that are published within my organization. If I now were to type, and I'm going to type all here, and let's use the word Seattle, okay, and hit a search, you're going to see a set of different icons that are now being published. And so the great thing about Power Query is you can actually combine those data sets together, bring them in, and then share out that query for search within your organization. So one of the things that I see here is that I have a combination of Wikipedia data, but I also have a set of data sets that have been published within a public data catalog. So I see I have a more targeted search. And so what I have in this case is this is a data set in which I pulled from corporate data, combined that with publicly accessible data, and then surface that by republishing that. So if a self-service BI user now were to go in, he does not need to go to each of the steps that I showed you to actually get that data. So I can republish that and include things like data refresh, and we're going to show you on how that works as well. Now, there's a lot of data sets out there. If you look at opportunities that you have with data, almost every city, every country, and so on, actually publishes a corporate data, citizen data, social services data. It's always fully accessible. And wouldn't it be nice, let's say, I am a business that focuses on selling heating installations and constructions, or I'm a general contractor. I mean, think about the opportunity. If I'm living in the city of New York, would it not be a great opportunity for me to identify new customers based on the issues that they reported? Like someone has a problem with heating inside their building. How about we take that and find out that information and look at opportunities on where I can now go to that building, talk to one of the owners and say, hey, I noticed you have a heating problem because we figured it out from the public data sets. We can fix that for you and just create business opportunities. And so what you're really doing here is you're looking at data sets, enrich your own with external data sets, and then leverage that as a strength to be able to monetize on the data and the strength you have with the data you're actually pulling in. And so what we did is I can actually easily get access to each of those data sets using the following capability. So what I can do is rather than performing an online search or whatsoever, I can do the following. Okay? What I'm doing here is I'm going to grab public data from the city of New York, and I'm going to pass that to Power Query and say I want to retrieve this from web. Now the retrieve from web allows you to specify any web page or URL. Again, similar to what we do with the Wikipedia pages, we're actually analyzing this. So I can do something like, hey, give me this API. So what you see is I'm calling an API that is returning a JSON document. And what I'm retrieving is the last 1,000 311 calls for the city of New York. Now, 311 call is actually a publicly accessible service where people file complaints. They're non-emergency calls. And what that means is someone were to call the service to say, hey, there's a heating problem in our building, or hey, there's a car blocking my driveway, there's someone parked illegally, there's a dead tree on the street, there's rats in the building, those kind of things is what people would call 311 for. And so a lot of these cities publish that kind of data and have similar services. Now what I see here is that I'm retrieving this from a JSON document, so I can actually look at each of the individual records. But what else I can do is I can say, no, I want to convert this for a table. So when I do this conversion, I can now expand this and identify out of the public data set that I'm accessing which are the columns that I'm interested in. And so there's some really interesting columns in this data set, and I'm not going to pull all of them. But what I can say is I'm interested in the zip code, so the postal code within the city. I'm also interested in the city itself, and I'm also interested into the longitude and latitude, because that's going to give me a very specific address. I also want to know the created date of when the call was actually made. I want to have a descriptor of the issue. I want to look at the borough, which is basically the city or area within the city. And there's the complaint type. I want to know what type of a complaint this was. So I'm grabbing this data set. You see that I get my data in almost instantly. You see that there's a description. You see that there's some columns that don't have any zip code or whatever based on the way the call was made. And so I can do the same thing as what I did before here. I can now say, hey, I want to change this type to a date type. So that will convert nicely for me. I don't have to rename this, but I think it would look a bit nicer if I were to rename this column and say this is just longitude. Rename this one, okay, just to show you the rename capability. This is latitude, okay. And of course, what I can do is I can actually say I want to filter and get rid of the null values that I have in this. So you have full filtering, and so the great thing about Power Query is actually it will look at the data source, and based on the data source, when you send this out, it will actually, what you're getting here is you're getting a preview of the data. You haven't pulled the data yet. It's just this listed as a preview. Now think about that. If you have a relational database and you have, let's say, 20 million records sitting within SQL Server, it would be a waste of resources if you were to apply all these filters and these columns and so on. It would be a waste of resources if you had to pull all of these into Excel and then filter them. That is not what's happening. What we're doing with Power Query is we're actually making this so smart that it would know based on the data source to go back to that data source and send out that select statement with the where clause, with some of the transformations that could be done onto the server side. So what we mapped out is we brought that data set into Power View. And so Power View is sitting within Excel, and it really allows me to do some quick reporting based on those data sets that I exposed using Power Query or loaded directly within the Power Pivot model. And so as this is loading, what we did pull in on this report is all of the calls since January 1st, 2014 and February 2nd, 2014. And if I talk to people and I ask them, what do you think the major complaint is in the city of New York? People would automatically say noise, because it's a loud city. Okay? Well, it turns out as we map this data and we bring that in on those categories, that the majority of the complaints are around heating. 62,000 calls around heating in about a month's time frame. That's a lot. We also thought that when we talked to people, was like the majority of the calls, if it's related to noise, it has to come in on the weekend. And we actually pointed out that, well, that's not true. Actually, the majority of the calls that come in are happening on Thursday. But if we look on Sunday, and we filter on Sunday, we'll see that we get less calls on heating, but we might have more calls related to complaints. Then we thought it would be interesting to be able to identify, like, based on the zip code or based on the borough in New York, are there any differences? And it looks like Brooklyn really stands out with the amount of calls. Manhattan and Queens are kind of the same in terms of calls. There's only 1,000 difference, which is not really that significant. But if I filter on Queens and I look at the issues that I have there, you see heating, street infrastructure, but also parking issues seems to be more frequent. If I do the same on Manhattan, you see that heating and noise. Noise is definitely a bigger issue than parking issues. If you ever drive in New York and you try to park in Manhattan and you park illegal, nobody's going to pick up and call 311 because by the time they call 311, they already towed the car because they're closely monitoring whether or not you should be there or not. So what's really nice about being able to bring in that data and pull that into Power View is the following. If I hit on snow and I filter on it, I can see some giant peaks. Okay, and those are effectively the days that New York was hit by a cold vortex, which basically the city was freezing and got dumped with snow. And I could easily identify the spikes just by being able to bring that kind of data in. Now, we were actually interested since New York City was hosting the Super Bowl, and Seattle fans were going to New York to watch the Super Bowl and were known to be the loudest fans. We were wondering whether there would be an impact on Super Bowl compared to any other Sunday. And so what we did there is, of course, we could build a Power View report out of that. But if you look on the capabilities that we have with the sharing and collaboration perspective in Power BI, what I can actually do is I can grab this workbook, publish that onto a Power BI site, consume that using the browser, and then enable a feature that we only have available in Power BI, which is natural language query or Q&A. So you could just, rather than having to build a report or build a visualization or build a pivot table or whatever, you could just start asking questions on those data sets based on the query you ask in English or further on the roadmap into the languages that Q&A will be customized in. Now, that kind of takes us back to the presentation. And I'm only going to show you this slide as a matter of completeness. So what I can do is I can grab this, share this, and then consume that on any device that you could potentially think of. And the way that works is as following. Okay. So what I can do is I can add Power BI as an offering to SharePoint Online or as an offering to Office 365. So the process is I have a team site, I can share out my documents on the team site, but what we did with Power BI is we actually have a very nice gallery that allows you to publish those data sets, and we're actually pulling that from a SharePoint library. So what I did is I actually uploaded that New York City report 4 hours ago. It was an early Seattle morning for me. But what I can do now is I can actually consume that same report using the browser. What I mean by that is the following. I can click on that, and I'm actually opening up Excel web app to be able to look at that document, to go through my reported calls. And what we'll see that this is now loading, okay? And if you're familiar with this, what we're actually loading here is we're loading Silverlight. Interesting. So I'm loading Silverlight report that's going to represent my Power View within the browser. Now, one of the other capabilities that we have is, since we do want to bring this to the masses, is we actually said, hey, wait a second here. Rather than using Silverlight, we want to be able to consume this report using HTML5. And I'm not sure why my load here is a bit slower than expected, so let's just stay tuned there for a second. Now, the great thing about being able to load this, if it's loading, come on now, and consume that using the browser. It gives you a lot of capabilities in terms of how you could surface this to the user. And so specifically to Windows 8, what we did is we built a Power BI application that you could just install from the store. So looking at that Power BI application, I can actually go in there, browse to that SharePoint site that I published this information on, and actually navigate and use that report directly within a native application. Now the great thing about this is, again, is you have a really great sharing and collaboration perspective that you can do with this report. And what I mean by that is you can consume this using a mobile app, as you can see, HTML5. I can still apply the same level of filterings that I have there that I showed you before. But there's just a great way to share this out by just simply using your sharing functionality in Windows 8 and say, hey, this report that I have here, I want to share that out with someone else. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually using the app on Windows 8 is actually using the split screen functionality in Windows 8.1. And I can just grab this, share this out, send it off to someone else, and then the other user could say, hey, I want to open this in the browser, or I want to copy paste this if I also have that Power BI app installed. Now, one of the questions that would come up is like, hey, what are you doing here in terms of usage on iPads? We're actually building a mobile app that would allow you to do exactly the same on iOS devices. So we're building a native app that will give you that functionality. Okay. Now, going back to the site, another feature that I wanted to show you is, before we go into Q&A, is the capability to do data refresh. So what I have here is this workbook is now published. There's a couple of things I can do with this. I can say, hey, I want to add this to the featured report, which means that this report will now show up on the top here as a featured report. What else I can do is I can say I want to schedule data refresh for this report. And if you look on the schedule data refresh capability you have here is, there's no connection in this report, okay. But what I can do is I can actually go into the settings of this report and specify when the queries that I'm using within this report should refresh. And you have the capability to connect back there to corporate data by setting up what we call a data management gateway. Now, I mentioned Q&A, and Q&A is an extremely useful capability to search for data and then publish something as a query that you might want to surface to other users. And so what I can do is the following. I can say like, hey, I want to see the number of calls. Okay. If I type number of calls here, what it will do is it will say like, hey, is this what you want? You want to show the number of 311 calls. So it actually translates that from the data model. So yeah, I want to see this, but I want to see this by borrow. Okay. If I want to see this by borrow, automatically I can map this out by borrow and see which of my borrows had more calls than the other. Now, what else I can do is I could say, well, I want to see this by hour. Sorry. Okay. Like, if I look on that, give me the 311 calls by hour. And there's one thing that you should notice here already. Okay. I'm not building any kind of reporting. I'm not building any kind of visualization. This visualization is generated automatically based on the best way to visualize for the query that you're asking. So, and now of course you're intrigued by this data, right? I want to see the number of calls by hour on Super Bowl Sunday. I look at it, I don't even need to type, it already knows what my suggestion is. So I want to see this by on Super Bowl Sunday versus the average calls per day. Okay. And I can see, well, if I look in the average calls per day, Super Bowl Sunday, which is now at the bottom, total calls appearing in blue, was actually extremely low. However, I get more calls 10 o'clock in the evening versus an average call I get at 10 o'clock in the evening. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. So what I can do now is I can continue and say, like, well, I want to see this versus average call per day versus average number of calls on Sunday. Okay. And I can see definitely that the average number of calls, but also the average number of calls on Sunday was significantly higher, which means during Super Bowl, people didn't really care about calling for any kind of complaints. Going back to the original query, I can see the number of calls by complaints type, okay, and actually list that out for each of the complaint types. If I do by complaint type, by borrow, okay, it will give me a map, but what I can do is I can actually say, like, hey, I don't want this as a map. I want this to be represented as a cluster bar chart. So I can actually do that as well. And then, of course, use all the filtering capabilities that you have there. Now, one last thing I want to show you is the following. What I can do is I can go back to my Q&A website. And so what I get here on this page, I get a series of frequently asked questions that I can build. So I can actually say, I want to add a featured question. And so what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to say, give me the difference in call volume between Super Bowl Sunday and an average Sunday. And so what it says here is, hey, this is interesting. I know how to provide the answer to that question. I want to show that on the Power BI site homepage. And what I can do now is I can say, hey, this is the question. But what else I can do is I can actually say, I want to provide a background image. So what I've done is I actually loaded a series of images onto Windows Azure Storage. If I go into one of those containers here, I can actually look at my image store and say that I have an image that is New York City 311. I'm just going to copy paste that URL here, right click here, paste that in there, hit save. I want to display this as a large icon. Okay, hit save. So now you can see that frequently asked question is up there. So for any consumer of Power BI, you then just click there, will automatically see the difference in call volume. If I do this by complaint category, I can now see the difference in calls. So, and this is really interesting. Less calls on street infrastructure, increased number of calls based on noise, which means that's why the Seattle Seahawks fans are the loudest fans in the NFL. Okay, with that, I think we are on time. So what I want to do is bring this back to Jen or Carmen to close this up. I would like to thank you for your time. Definitely the workbook that we have here, it's all publicly accessible, so I have no problem actually giving you access to that workbook and share that workbook out with you as well. With that, Carmen, Jen, if you want to take this back, it's all yours. Thanks, everyone.
Really enjoyed that. So I'm unmuted now, so thank you very much, Dandy, for that session. Really enjoyed that. I just wanted to say thank you to Dandy for an awesome session. I certainly learned a lot from it. I'm sorry there was a bit of noise during that, which I will make sure is removed from the recording. But I just wanted to say thank you to Dandy for a great session, and we would love to have you back present for us on another occasion. And with that, I've had a quick look to see if there are any questions, and I saw that James has asked if it's possible to get a hold of some public data sets, and Dandy's very kindly offered to people to have a look at the solution he's built, but you could always look at the Azure Data Market as well. Now, the Windows Azure Data Market has a lot of free data sources, and I personally really like the fact that Power Query allows you to query Wikipedia data and scrape that. So there's plenty of places. You might also want to look at the New York one that Dandy suggested, and there's some British European ones as well. So with that, I think we'll close for this evening. I wanted to thank everybody who joined. We had a lot of attendees today, and I learned a lot, and I hope you did as well. And with that, wherever you are in the world, thank you very much. Good morning, good evening, and good night, as they say. And thanks to Dandy again. Bye-bye.
Before you're actually bringing that to the client. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to name this query and say this is New York City, last 1,000 calls. I can give a description, and now I can bring it in, hit apply and close. There's another thing I'm going to do here real quick is I can actually say that I want to insert a custom column. And so with a custom column, I can actually start using expressions. Okay, so I can change and say I want this to be the borrow. Okay, and then what I can do here is I can actually use the Power Query formula language, which is going to each of the details that you have in the Power Query formula language in order to do more complex transformations on the data. So you have some capabilities right there. Okay. So if I hit apply and close here now, my data will start to load. Okay. And I want to expose this data set to other people. The way to expose that is by right-clicking here. And now since I'm logged on within my corporation, I can now hit share and say this is New York City, last 1,000 calls. In the sharing options that we have there, you can share with just me. And so I've got 2 kids on the age of 3. That's how they share. They just share with themselves. Or I could share with everyone in my organization. Or I can share with specific people and groups of people within the organization that would allow me to use SharePoint online-based grouping or Active Directory-based grouping to actually share that. Okay, so let's share this out with everyone in the enterprise, which basically means that once that I shared this out and someone is going back to Power Query, what I can do now is I can do an online search, say that I want to search for New York City. Okay. I want to look within my organization, and I can see that list that I published. It says New York City, most recent 311 calls, and actually pulling that entire data set that I'm exposing that way. Now, self-service GI capabilities is also about quick visualizations, and there's a couple of ways we can do that. So what I can do is I can now grab this data set and say, hey, I want to go and insert a Power View report. In order to be respectful of the time that we have for this call, I'm not going to go into the Power View itself. But what I can do is I can actually use another capability that is called Power Map. And so by launching Power Map, I now have the capability to do a 3D visualization of the data that I'm pulling in. And I can actually build a series of tours within Power Map that allow me to map out that data. And as this is currently loading, I hope that data refresh on your screen is not going to be as bad as it is on mine.
Yes, reflections going to say, well, I'm actually holding a webinar for Microsoft in the US at the minute, and
Okay.
perhaps Bandy's
So as this is loading, what you see here is I get a map. Okay. Wow, this is really nice. I get the globe. I can zoom down. I can actually, this is fully touch enabled, so I have fortunate enough to have a touch monitor, which is currently set to be very sensitive. But what I can do is I can navigate, browse around, and look at the data. What I can do next is I can actually map the labels and get some more insights on what we have here. Now, what you see on the right-hand side here, it says, I have a geography and map level. And so it analyzes my data model and says, hey, wait a minute here. I noticed that you have latitude, longitude, because I can see that based on the way data is structured. But I also notice you have something like a city, a country, a region, a province, a territory, whatsoever. And I can actually automatically detect that as mapping capabilities. So what we're doing here in terms of mapping is we're analyzing that data and we're passing off this mapping capabilities to the Bing API, which then allows me to go to each of those layers. Okay? And I can see my mapping. What else I can do is I can now go to the settings of that layer and say, hey, I want to have this in a bit smaller size here. Okay, we can tilt this a bit. So I can see there's my last 1,000 calls in the city of New York in this case. And what I can do with that layer is I can go a couple of various ways. These are my data mapping points. What I can do here is I can say, well, yeah, I want to build a story with transformations going from one scene to the other, which is kind of like building a movie with something like a Windows Movie Maker or whatsoever. So what I can do is I can say I want to add a scene on top of the existing one. And what I want to do with that is I now actually want to represent the complaint type. Okay. So automatically I go from data to straight visualizations. And what I see there is there seems to be a location that is really sticking out in the city of New York. And interestingly enough, it's not the Empire State Building. Looking at that, I see there's some complaint types. There seems to be a special projects inspection team assigned, so that's very severe. But there's complaints about plumbing, there's complaints about general construction, there's complaints about the elevator, there's complaints about electrical issues. I would not want to live within that building. Okay. Looking at adding an additional layer, what I can do is I can actually put a layer on top of the existing one and represent multiple data sets. So what I'm going to do now is I can actually take and overlay the last 1,000 calls and say I want to map this based on the zip level, okay, and put an additional overlay. So what's going to happen now as I hit next is I create another layer, and I'm going to specify on top of that layer that I do want to see the incident zip code, but I don't want to see that as a column. I want to see that as a heat map. Okay. So what I can see now is I can see a heat map of the zip codes, or I can say I can turn this into a region and specify regional coloring based on the number of calls that I'm getting within each of those regions. So I can say, well, the region there is actually, we're going to map that to the created date. Okay? And I can actually color based on the amount of calls that I do get. Okay? Just quick and easy on how you can, I mean, think about how amazing this is. I'm pulling in an external data set, combine that with my existing data, and now represent that on top of a map, which actually allows me to do the following. What I can do is I can create a video out of this and then start editing the video, publish that video for consumption. Now, if I close this one, the great thing about Power Map is I can have multiple scenes, I can have multiple tours in there and represent that data. Now let's go bigger. Let's talk about some bigger amounts of data that we pulled in. So what I did is the following. Is I went to Power Query, and I go to from other sources, and I went to Windows Azure HD Insight, which is the Microsoft Hadoop distribution running on Windows Azure. So what I can do now is I can say I want to connect to my HD Insight server. Okay. And as I connect to the HD Insight server, I can actually browse each of the storage containers that we have there. Now, I have a folder there that is containing New York City data. And what I can see there within that folder is a series of files that might have the same structure. But what I see there is I have this binary file that's containing,
I'm really sorry, but
I have a CSV file that's containing 311 call data starting from 2010 until current. So that by itself is containing over 6 billion records of calls for the city of New York. And guess what the insights I can get out of that? So what we actually did is we did run a couple of Hive queries and pull that result set together and say, I want the New York City data starting from January this year until February 2nd. And so we pulled that data set in, and we actually loaded that into the Power Pivot model. I'm going to come back to that Power Pivot model a bit later as well to show on how we can actually enhance the Power Pivot model to support the feature that we call natural language query. So you see that I have my 311 calls. I did calculate some DEX expressions on how many calls do I have there, what's the number of received calls, what's the average of call per day, but actually fairly simple data model that I could use to start doing analysis on.